Since one of the major questions everyone had after Fallout dumped its whole season on Prime Video a week ago has been answered, it's time to look at the biggest questions that it left us asking. There is a second season coming, which is good news, especially considering how long something like this takes to make. A quick renewal should get it here a little faster, and from everything I've read, the studio couldn't be happier about the positive response. A fairly extensive interview came out yesterday with game director Todd Howard from Bethesda Studios and executive producer on the show Jonathan Nolan, who also directed the first 3 episodes. In that, they answered some questions I had directly, so we'll get into that as well. And if you're not familiar with my channel, I'm a TV recapper first, so this will be from that perspective. I played the games, I'm a fan, and have a strong interest in the lore, which I'll touch on some, but this is a video that is supposed to appeal to everyone because a lot of new people have just discovered the Fallout universe through the show. So the first big question, will there be a second season, has been answered. Yes, that was confirmed on April 18th, 2024. Just 6 days after the show's first season premiered. The natural next question then is, when will the new season come out? A question that doesn't have an answer and is much harder to speculate on because there are so many factors involved. From talking with showrunners on other shows, I know there's been a trend for a lot of multi-season shows to go back into the writer's room and knock out the next season's scripts even before they've been ordered. That was largely in place before last year's writer's strike, so I'm not sure how that affected things. In an interview for Collider, co-showrunner Graham Wagner confirmed that since they're on an overall deal with Prime Video, they started working on Season 2 as soon as they were done with Season 1, hoping that that would shrink the amount of time fans had to wait. He specifically pointed out that he isn't a big fan of waiting 2 years in between seasons for shows he likes. And a lot of big shows can take that long, so he's hoping that they could knock out seasons faster. That said, they haven't written the scripts for Season 2 yet, so we'll have to wait and see when they start shooting to get a better sense of how long we'll have to wait. A question I had was if they would abandon the binge release and opt to drop episodes weekly as Amazon did with shows like The Boys and The Expanse. Unfortunately, in the same interview, Wagner seemed to favor the binge release, but perhaps the executives will have other ideas. I have a bias as a weekly recapper, but I also got into doing this because I enjoy the conversation around popular TV shows almost as much as the shows themselves. I would like to see them drop the binge so that we would have the week to talk about each episode while we wait for the next one. Details surrounding the second season were slim, but another thing they said related to the announcement was that shooting was expected to move to California in order to benefit from a $25 million tax credit. The first season was shot in New York and Utah, and that worked fine for the Wasteland, so I'm not sure how much of a difference this will make. Based on the closing stinger with Hank, we can expect that we'll be spending at least part of the time in New Vegas, which probably doesn't mean much to you if you just found out about Fallout through the show. If you watched my Season 1 video, you'll know that I was super impressed with the attention to detail, but there was just one thing that threw me off. It was a date that was revealed on the chalkboard in Vault 4. That was because it had a date for the fall of Shady Sands that predated the game Fallout New Vegas, where the NCR is still a functioning force to be reckoned with, and there are mentions of Shady Sands which made everything confusing. Some fans took this as a slight on their favorite Fallout game and declared that this was a plan to retcon the game out of the official canon. That didn't make sense to me because there were several references to characters and events from the game, plus the closing scene that promised that we'd be visiting there. Regardless, this is something that Todd Howard responded to in the interview. He said, "We're careful about the timeline. There might be some confusion in some places, but everything that happened in the previous games, including New Vegas, happened." He goes on to clarify that the Shady Sands bomb, the one that Hank was responsible for, falls just after the events of New Vegas. This doesn't clarify why the date on the chalkboard doesn't line up, and there really isn't a good explanation for that. There's been quite a few that people have run with to try to make sense of it, but they don't add up if you look at the actual details involved. But there are a lot of moving parts when making a TV show, and accidents or bad choices can happen. Or it could have been on purpose and there's some other layer that hasn't been revealed yet. I just have no idea what that could be. But with that clarification, we can move on. If you never played the games, is there anything you need to know about New Vegas? If the show is doing its job, then the answer is no. And if it's not doing that, then maybe that's when you should start thinking about finding something different to watch. There is a tremendous amount of related lore that you might find fascinating. But one of the key things to understand when it comes to the show and the way it relates to that is that the games are filled with decisions that can affect their endings. That's part of the fun. You make tough decisions. Sometimes you have to go against your own morality or whatever. And then depending on your choices, there are multiple possible outcomes. So if your question is, what did it mean that Hank showed up at New Vegas at the end of episode 8? The answer is, it depends. Until the show tells us which ending of New Vegas they're going with and making official, you wouldn't be able to say for sure. So for an oversimplified blurb, New Vegas is the post-war community that sprouted out of Las Vegas. As you see at the end of season 1, it almost looks like an ancient walled city that when you enter for the first time in the game, seems to be relatively unaffected by the Great War compared to most of the other places you visit in Fallout games. It's a bit of an oasis with hotels, casinos, and just about everything else Vegas was known for before the war. Like everything in the Fallout universe, it's not exactly the same, and it's not completely unaffected. There are reasons related to the character I mentioned that you might want to pay attention to who was representing Robco at the meeting at Vault-Tec in the show's finale. Mr. House runs New Vegas and can be someone you can support or an antagonist depending on how you play. The Ghoul believed that Hank answered to someone and that by letting him go, he would lead him to them, and that might get him one step closer to finding his family. Everything else is to be determined at this point. Where his family is would be the Ghoul's biggest burning question, and also one of ours, and I would also add another one related to that, which would be who was Barb answering to? This is something the Ghoul may already know. I'm referring to the shadowy figure that she looked at in the meeting after she got the message on her Pip-Boy, and before she made the big pitch about dropping the bombs themselves. Just like the question of who dropped the first bomb had been left mysterious, there isn't a lot of information about the high-level executives that were in charge of Vault-Tec before the war. I still think it's a valid question of whether or not Vault-Tec did drop the first bomb, or if the point is that they were willing to do that. One thing that was never left mysterious was that the war was inevitable one way or the other. So in a way, it's not that important who dropped the first bomb. I also don't think Barb or any of the other higher-ups would be in Vault 31. I think they made a distinction that that was all people that were related to Bud's plan, so I do hope there's more to discover there. Since I brought up Vault 31, I do wonder what will happen to Norm. His story was fun to follow, and they put some effort into developing the kind of character that he is to give us an idea of how he may play a part later, but I do think given his options, he'd probably have to enter cryosleep, which makes me wonder when he'll re-enter the story. What happened in Vault 32 is an open question as well. The only thing Bud's brain said about 32 and 33 was that they were there to provide breeding stock for his junior executives when they woke up. But there could be more to it. There's probably more to it. Something went violently wrong in 32. Something that would be hard to imagine happening in 33. The show's been faithful to the games' format of revealing new vaults and all the strangeness surrounding the different experiments that happens in them, which means that's something we should expect more of in future seasons. Probably the most repeated question I saw in the comments was how was Moldaver still alive 200 years after the Great War? This is something I didn't spend a long time thinking about while I was watching the first season, waiting for the reveal because they introduced the cryopods. There was an in-world explanation. Then she died without any reveal at all. It's not something they have to explain, but the more I thought about it, the more it stood out that not doing that was a choice. So my question ended up being, is there more to the reason why they didn't reveal what was going on with Moldaver? Does making us think about that set up a payoff down the road? In the IGN interview, Jonathan Nolan seemed to hint there was a reason behind the decision and said he'd love to spend more time with the actor and revisit her story. They also got the question of what did their defeat at the observatory mean for the NCR? Essentially, was this all that was left of the NCR? This isn't something they wanted to give a complete answer to, but they did say something to the effect that they didn't think this would be the last time we heard about the NCR. Now that she's released cold fusion, it'll be interesting to see how that changes things in the Wasteland. While she gave it away, she didn't hold out much hope that the Brotherhood would continue on the same path. Of course, there are big questions about what Maximus will do with his newfound status in the organization, but probably the bigger question would be about Elder Cleric Quintus's intentions, because he's shown an interest in Maximus. And if you think about it, he was presented as a villain, or at the very least someone who was hiding something. The Brotherhood can be a little bit strange, but it seemed like there was something going on there. Will him being the one to get his hands on free energy mean that he'll hand it over to a Brotherhood that he said has lost its way? Or will he go in his own direction, and what would that mean for Maximus? Factions are a big part of the way Fallout creates its stories, and usually you have to decide who to support. Helping one faction generally means harming another, and they all have their issues. It's rare to feel like you have all the information, and you usually have reasons to be suspicious. Wilzig was working for the Enclave, but once he left his lab, they mostly stayed out of the picture. I doubt the show would introduce such an important faction without a larger purpose in mind. And I also wonder what new factions we might meet in Season 2, and the tough decisions our main characters will have to make to accomplish their goals. Lucy and the Ghoul are on a quest together, and they've got some ground to cover before they catch up to Hank in New Vegas. How will that change them? How will they change each other? And if they find the answers they're looking for, how will that change things? I can't wait to find out. There are a lot more questions, a ton more. Like, is Thaddeus actually becoming a ghoul, or what did that random encounter give him that he seems to be invincible? But I suppose if you're going to call them burning questions, you have to stick to the most pressing ones. And I think that is a great place to leave things. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.